During these unprecedented times presented by the global coronavirus pandemic, there has been one thing the people have reliably turned to for comfort. Not Netflix, friends, or even loved ones. Sourdough bread. Sourdough has been the undeniable winner of COVID-19, and that's exactly what I'm going to be attempting to make today for the very first time. The first step to a delicious sourdough is a well-cultured starter, a fermented mixture of flour and water that produces natural yeast. If, like me, you've been waiting until your wife goes to bed each night to crack open your stanky mason jar to feed your budding young yeast colony, then at this point you already have a starter. The night before you plan to make your bread, simply remove all but 80% of the starter and replace that amount with 50% water at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 25% whole wheat flour, and 25% bread flour or all-purpose flour. Stir well to combine and set aside overnight so that ample yeast can form to provide flavor and rise to your bread. If you're just embarking on this journey and don't yet have a starter, don't panic. The good news is that you're about to learn how to make one and that it only takes about 5 minutes of effort a day. The bad news is that you'll need to leave your new starter for about 5 days before it's ready to use in bread. So unfortunately, you won't be eating delicious fresh sourdough tomorrow. To make your starter, first get a good glass jar and weigh it empty and without the lid on. Write down the weight. This is key to figuring out the weight of the starter in your jar when it comes time for daily feeding. Next, add 100 grams of 80 degree Fahrenheit water, 50 grams of whole wheat flour, and 50 grams of bread flour or all-purpose flour. Mix to combine and voila! You've now got the conditions to grow your own little bacteria army. Write the jar's weight and date on a piece of tape and stick it to the side of the jar. Don't forget to give your starter a name. Love is the secret ingredient that encourages yeast growth. Place your new starter next to his big brother and let him start to grow. After leaving it aside for 2 days, you're ready to feed the starter for the first time, which will now become a part of your daily schedule. 80% of the contents come out to be replaced by an equal weight made up of 50% water, 25% whole wheat flour, and 25% bread flour or all-purpose flour. 12 to 15 hours after feeding your mature starter, once it's nice and bubbly, it's time to put together the dough. Into a large bowl goes 350 grams of 80 degree Fahrenheit water and 100 grams of starter, which we then stir gently to incorporate. Next, we add 450 grams of bread flour and 50 grams of whole wheat flour. This gets mixed thoroughly until combined and then left to Autolyse for 30 minutes, also known as time to walk your dog. After the Autolyse is complete, it's time to add the final ingredient, salt, which is excluded from the initial rest period because it inhibits yeast activity, and we want all the delicious flavor bubbles we can get. Combine 10 grams of salt in a bowl with 25 grams of 80 degree Fahrenheit water and stir to combine. I find doing this helps more evenly incorporate the salt into the dough. Once incorporated, pour the salt and water mixture over the top of your dough and use a combination of folds and pinches to incorporate. Once incorporated into a loose ball, it's time to start the bulk proof. We're going to leave the dough to strengthen over the next 3 hours, coming back to it every 30 minutes to apply a gentle fold before again covering it with a damp kitchen towel. Watch how the dough develops in structure and rigidity from its first fold to its final fold. Three hours and 5 folds later, it's time to shape the dough. We first shape the dough into a ball, let it rest one more time, and then apply the final shape and place the dough into a proofing basket for the final proof. Using a dough spatula, work the dough out of the bowl and onto a lightly floured work surface. Using floured hands, fold the outside of the dough in on itself so that only the floured surface is on the exterior. Use a bench scraper in your hand to pull the dough across the work surface, tightening the dough into a ball and developing its shape. Once you start to feel resistance in the dough when pulling it across the surface, the dough is ready to bench rest. We pretty much just leave it where it is for 20 minutes with the same goal as every other rest period, developing flavor and structure. Now it's time for the big finale, the final manipulation of this dough before it heads into the oven and emerges as a beautiful, crusty loaf. To shape the dough, we first lightly flour the surface, and then use our hand and the bench scraper to carefully flip the dough over so that the floured side is on the bottom. This movement takes practice and confidence to get right. Otherwise, you basically just smear dough across your board. Once flipped, and again with floured hands, take the bottom third of the dough and fold it up and into the center. Then, stretch the dough horizontally and fold each side into the center. Take the furthest third, pull it up and over the dough like you're tucking it into bed, then grab the dough slightly under the seam you just created and push it away from you and over the dough, flipping the whole thing onto the seam. Cup your hands around the dough and drag it across the work surface a couple of times, rotating it 90 degrees each time. Sit back and admire your shaped loaf. After letting the shaped dough rest for a minute or two, it's ready to go into a well-floured proofing basket. Using the same quick and decisive movement, slide the bench scraper under the dough and flip it so that it is in the proofing basket with the seam side up, the side that was previously the bottom of the dough. You could leave the dough to rest in the proofing basket at room temperature for 3 hours and then bake it, but for the best flavor, I'm going to cover the basket with a damp cloth and let it undergo its final rise in the fridge for the next 12 hours. Once the final rise is done, it's baking time. Put your Dutch oven into your oven and begin preheating to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Once your oven is preheated, give it about 10 more minutes to ensure the Dutch oven is thoroughly heated throughout. To bake, remove your proofing basket from the fridge and keep it handy next to your oven. Please bear in mind that for the next few steps, you'll be working with a scorching hot Dutch oven. So be careful and always double check that you've got your oven mitts on before touching anything. Take the Dutch oven out and remove the lid. Get your proofing basket and swiftly flip it upside down over the Dutch oven. Your dough should slowly plop out. Slowly plop out. Don't worry if it sticks slightly, just give the proofing basket a few firm shakes and the dough should release. With either a baking lom or a sharp paring knife, score the dough. Then put the lid back on and place it back into the oven. Drop the heat to 450 degrees Fahrenheit and let the bread bake with the lid on for 30 minutes. This initial bake with the lid on traps the moisture being released from the dough within the Dutch oven, creating steam which forms a skin on the outside of the dough that eventually becomes the crunchy crust we know and love. 30 minutes later, take the Dutch oven out, remove the lid and place it aside, admire the beautiful loaf that's well on its way, and put the uncovered Dutch oven back into the oven for 15 to 20 more minutes. This period of baking uncovered is what crisps the outside and forms the dark, rich crust which creates both texture and rich flavor in the bread, referred to scientifically as a Maillard reaction. Check the loaf after 15 minutes and use your judgment to see if it needs more browning. Pretty much anything other than charred black goes. Once the bread is sufficiently brown, don your oven mitts one last time and remove the Dutch oven from the oven. Hold the side of the Dutch oven in one hand and gently flip the loaf out into the other hand. Put the Dutch oven aside and use both hands to place the finished loaf on a wire rack to cool for at least 20 minutes. While it's difficult to resist immediately slicing into the bread and sinking your teeth into what will surely be a warm bite of heaven, distract yourself by listening to the snap and crackle of the crust cooling. Once the bread is cool, it's time to cut a slice and see how we did. Just from looking at the loaf, it seems like I got a decent oven spring on at least half, but the other side came out a bit flat. Probably from poor scoring and not completely centering the loaf in the Dutch oven, so some adjustments to make for next time. Exterior side, let's cut into this and see the inside. The crumb is a bit tighter than I would have liked, and the crust a bit thinner than I'd prefer, but this bread tastes great. Sweet and chewy, with a creaminess to it that fills your mouth, nothing to complain about here. Even got the seal of approval from the wife. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this for my first sourdough attempt ever. Next time around, I'll wait for my starter to develop a bit more before using it to get the nice airy bubbles I'm looking for. And I'll also center the loaf in the Dutch oven before it goes into the oven and leave it in for a few minutes longer with the lid off at the end to get a heartier crust. Excited to try this one again soon. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.